Well, welcome everyone to App Promotion Summit London 2022, the digital sessions. We've got 3 days of digital content for you now. Some of you may have attended the in-person event last Thursday, which was really great. We had 400 people live and in person at the Marriott Grosvenor Square. That was absolutely fantastic, but we've got even more fantastic stuff coming up for you this week. So today is ASO. Tomorrow we'll be talking UA, and Thursday we'll be talking product and engagement. If you just let us know everything's okay in the chat. If you can't see the stream, just refresh. Swapcard have promised us they have a new integrated video system coming very shortly, so that should make things easier. In the meantime, just refresh. Please say hi in the chat. Let us know you're here, where you're from. That'd be great. And yes, we will be kicking off right now. And let me see. So what is there to do? I think a bit of housekeeping just to pull out that there's a questions tab in the discussion box there. If you want to ask Sam any questions, we'll take them at the end. It's always great when we get some Q&A, live Q&A going. And then also, if you hit the gear icon on the video stream, you can normally get a higher quality. For some reason, it's always setting you to lower. So hit the gear icon. You can also get it to full screen. I think that's it for me. Very excited for our next talk. I'm going to hand you over to Samuel Chilton. He's the CTO of Redbox Mobile. He's going to be talking about using data science to improve your search ads campaign performance. Please give him a big App Promotion Summit London 2022 digital edition. Welcome to the virtual stage. Over to you, Sam.
Thanks, James. Morning, everyone. Yeah, as James said, I'm Sam Chilton, CTO of Redbox Mobile. Going to be taking today to talk a little bit about how we've looked at, I guess, using data and using some data science techniques here at Redbox Mobile, and give you a little bit of an idea about how you might be able to use that to improve and enhance your own kind of campaign performance. So a little bit about me. I've come into the kind of app marketing kind of space by a slightly kind of serendipitous route, really. I kind of got a background in the defense sector and the scientific kind of research space, and this really has been a bit of a foray into taking some of those kind of analytical skills that I've attained and seeing how we can apply those in a much more kind of commercially kind of minded sector, and it's really interesting to me, and hopefully you'll be able to see how I've managed to have some impact in that space. So who are Redbox Mobile? We are a app store optimization and user acquisition organization. We've won multiple awards in this space, and we're an official kind of Apple Search Ads partner. What it is we're really looking to do is we've built up years and years of experience in manually kind of running Apple Search Ads campaigns, and we've got an incredibly kind of competent account management team, and what we've been trying to do is take a lot of the experience and knowledge that they've attained over the last few years and apply that to our platform. So we've built a platform that is able to kind of automate the management of Apple Search Ads campaigns. We're just in the midst of doing a kind of new iteration of that. You'll see some kind of early indications of what that's going to present a little later on today. But yes, that's really, really exciting. But I wanted to give you a bit of a sense and a bit of flavor as to how we've kind of brought data science into this space, really. So there's kind of 3 or 4 core sections that I'm intending to cover. One is a little bit about how keyword auctions actually work within Apple Search Ads. Apologies if that's kind of knowledge you already have, but I think it's helpful for everyone just to make sure everyone's got some clarity around that, how that works. We're then going to talk a little bit about technical relevancy and what that means, and then about some techniques you can do to aid and support understanding and optimizing the performance of your campaigns. So the keyword auction explained. So the App Store operates what's referred to as a second price auction. And what that means is kind of this all happens automatically, obviously behind the scenes, but when an ad becomes available for apps to kind of serve their advert against, an auction happens. And what happens is there's a variety of bid prices that get set. And because it's a second price auction system, what happens is the winning bid isn't necessarily the one that was kind of determining who was going to pay the most. So if you were willing to pay $1.55, you don't pay $1.55, you pay the amount that the second highest bidder was willing to pay. And that, I guess that's relatively similar to how something like eBay works, where you basically keep bidding until you beat the second highest bidder. Whereas in a more conventional auction system, you can bid by a kind of an increment you choose, which is where that's kind of a first price auction system. That's not kind of solely how things work in Apple land. So in the App Store, there is a second criterion, which is technical relevancy. And technical relevancy is all related to whether your app basically has got a greater chance of being relevant to the user's search than somebody else's. And actually, this has a significant bearing on your likelihood of winning the auction. So it's not just down to who's willing to pay the most. And that becomes a kind of interesting facet that we have to kind of account for. And it's further kind of compounded by the fact that we never kind of fully learn from Apple exactly how technical relevancy works or what it is. We can infer things by how we've seen it perform, conversations people may have had with Apple, and using a bit of common sense, but it is a little bit of a black box that we have to try and interact and interface with. So technical relevancy, for all intents and purposes, is kind of regarded as the likelihood that a user searching for that search term is going to click on your advert versus a separate advert being served. And what that means is if you were a shopping app and somebody searched for the search term news, it's fairly unlikely that they're going to click on that advert. And that's quite important because Apple charge you at the point that the advert is clicked. If they serve an advert that doesn't get clicked, they in effect don't get paid for that advert, and also they're providing a poor user experience for their consumers. So that's where you've got to kind of work out, how do you make sure that you're bidding on keywords that are relevant to you? And that's where you've got to try and infer, I guess, a little bit about how technical relevancy works. When you get two apps, that if you had two sports apps both bidding on the keyword sports, there might be a relatively similar level of technical relevancy, and then that is where kind of that bid price has a more significant effect. But it's quite important to understand that. You can get some gauge of how you may be performing from a relevancy point of view if you speak to Apple or look on the app, the kind of the search ads platform. There's some things about share of voice that is a little bit of an indication about how you might be performing. How can we potentially influence it? So we know that Apple make use of the metadata for your app. So that's the kind of the image and text descriptions that you make as part of your app submission. And it's very, very important that you make sure that is current. You can look at things like localizations, and it's making sure it is actually relevant and descriptive and accurate in describing your app. Historical performance is really, really important. So if people that see your advert don't click on it, or click on it but don't download your app, and all of those sorts of things, that's really, really important, because again, Apple are trying to maximize the quality of that user experience and maximize the quality of the recommendations that they're providing out to the user. So it's important that you're conscious of that. And then as an advertiser, we've got to really think about how do we decide what keywords we should be trying to bid against. And I'll take you through a little bit about how we might want to do that. So ASO, App Store Optimization, this is kind of one of those really kind of crucial parts around affecting your technical relevancy. It's something that you can do very, very simply, or you can do very, very kind of in a very complex fashion. We kind of at Redbox describe ASO kind of in three core pillars. One is that keyword visibility piece. So that's all about that kind of metadata editing piece that we spoke around. One is around how do we improve conversion rates. So Apple do provide some mechanisms to support with that, but a big part of that is making sure screenshots are kind of are good, they are engaging for users, and that's a really important part to get right. And then it's all about increased install velocity. So what we mean by that is the more kind of traffic that is going towards it, the more information that Apple is able to learn about how your app performs, and therefore it's able to kind of make a more clear and accurate decision on how it decides to kind of promote your app and your adverts. Keyword efficacy is a really kind of big part of how do we identify keywords that users search for. That's a massive challenge, and I don't think anyone's got a completely solved solution for that, but we'll talk about some of the techniques you can explore, and how do we work out which of those are going to deliver us a positive return on our investment, and how much do we need to spend on them, or how much should we spend on them to make sure that we meet those objectives. So when you start this, if you're thinking of a new app that you might have, you've really got to think around learning about how your app performs and what it is that you need to do in order to learn those characteristics about it. So there's kind of three core things. One is, what are the keywords the user's searching for? Are these keywords relevant to our app, and how much can we afford to pay for them? So below is a kind of an example from Apple. So it's got obviously just kind of trivial search terms, but Apple provides some stuff around, is your bid kind of strong enough? Are you paying enough for it? What is the suggested bid range? And these can be helpful, but these things aren't available for all keywords. It doesn't necessarily fully account for technical relevancy, and it doesn't mean that you can't get impressions at a lower point, but you might just be getting a smaller slice of the pie. But if a keyword term is getting 100,000 searches a day, and you're quite a small app and achieving 2 or 3% of that for a low price point, that might be quite acceptable for you. So you do have to take what you're seeing there with a pinch of salt, and also think about other methods we can do to kind of further enrich that that knowledge pool that we've got. So we've come up with quite a few interesting ways of doing it. The traditional ways are using keyword tools. There's a number out there that I'm sure you're aware of. We have a kind of one inbuilt into our system as well. And we make use of something that's called natural language processing. Natural language processing is kind of an arm of machine learning, depending on kind of how much of a purist you want to be. And kind of nominally it refers to kind of computational manipulation of text with code. So how can we make sense, in effect, of text using programmatic approaches? There's loads and loads of different kind of parts of natural language processing. I'm not going to even kind of make a start on trying to cover all of those, but one of the really important areas for me, from my perspective anyway, is something called semantic analysis. And what we're trying to do there is not see it just as text on a page, but actually start to understand the context in which search terms and text is kind of used to be described. So one of the things I was really kind of keen to try and do when we started was, if you've got two news apps on the App Store as an example, are there kind of common terms that are being used to describe those that you might not perhaps be thinking of? So if you're promoting Sky News and you've kind of put all your keywords in of breaking news stories, live events, expert analysis, journalism, whatever you want to go with, we can then use those as kind of starting terms or seed terms. And what we can do with those is then go, right, across the App Store, who else's app is talking about live events or breaking news stories? Okay, so we can do a very simple search that might give us potential competitors that we might be interested in bidding against. But what other words do they use to describe their app that perhaps we haven't included in that keyword pool that we're trying to kind of list for? So an example in this one, might be politics as an example. So, okay, so people that are generally searching for news apps might be interested in politics. Okay, that's a fairly obvious one. But when you start getting into kind of a bit more kind of niche apps, that becomes really, really crucial. So when you start looking at puzzle apps as an example, you might not be a crossword app, but you might want to list for the word crossword because the type of people that like crossword apps like other puzzle apps. And what we're trying to do is build out that kind of keyword pool. And hopefully we've then got loads of candidate keywords that we can look at exploring. This isn't like a particularly simple kind of technique, but it is a really powerful technique, and kind of it is one of those that's really worth kind of reading up on, learning about. And I wouldn't be surprised if you'll see quite a few of the kind of keyword discovery systems out there do use something quite similar to that. So let's kind of step forward from there. So let's say we have a keyword now that we want to bid for. So let's just use the keyword Apple as an example here. We then need to work out how much do we pay for that and how much can we get away with paying for it with respect to the budget that we might be looking to spend. So that's not any easy task. We need to work out what our constraints are. And when we talk about constraints, what we're trying to work out is, this can be quite basic, how much do we want to pay per install? How much is our budget? How quickly do we want to spend that budget? We've got to kind of draw up our set of constraints or rules, depending on how you want to define them. And then we've got to work out how do we learn this. And when we start running it, because we've got to account for this thing called technical relevancy is going to be defined at an app level, we've kind of got to start with a little bit of a blank canvas. So what you can do, and what we've explored doing previously, is, let's say we know we're willing to pay up to $15 for the keyword Apple. Or we want to pay $15 for an install via the for our app. What we can do is go, right, let's set the bid at $1, let's set the bid at $2, set the bid at $3, so on and so forth, and see how performance varies over that range. So in the example we've got here, we can see that the more we spent in this scenario, the more installs that were available to us. But although more installs are available, which kind of makes sense, the more you spend, the more you're potentially able to win, the price goes up quite significantly. Whereas if we looked at the price point of, say, $5, we're still able to get 2 installs at that price for the test range that we were exploring. And that might be enough. We might be happy in getting a smaller slice of the pie, but getting them at a price point that we're happy with. And that's where this all becomes quite complicated. It also becomes very kind of specific to you and your objectives and your constraints that you're trying to run under. But it means that actually by doing this kind of testing process, we can learn quite a lot about it. And one of the things that I didn't mention earlier, but is worth kind of being aware of, is no one app can win all adverts. You can win quite a large percentage. So you might be able to win 90% of the share of the impressions, but there's still 10% that you can't win. So there's always some availability for other apps to be able to start serving against that, and that doesn't mean you've always got to pay top dollar for them. And obviously Apple have got to do that to learn about how that keyword might perform for other apps, because that new app might become more technically relevant than what was historically the leader in that space. So there's quite a few different things you've got to kind of be conscious of when doing that. When we look at how do we optimize for keywords, and you've got to remember, for a campaign you could have hundreds if not thousands of keywords, and let's say we've gone through that scenario of learning the performance, and I can show you what that will look like in a minute. But when you try and work out how much should you pay for keyword 1 over keyword 2, it becomes something that we generally would refer to in the machine learning space as a global optimization problem. There's a slight segue here because I wanted to explain very briefly what global optimization was, using for me, what is the kind of the most simplistic way of explaining it. And the easiest way to look at it is, if you were looking to run a delivery company and you've got iPhones or whatever that you wanted to deliver to the hundreds or so addresses across the course of the day, how do you work out which route you want to take to make sure that you minimize fuel consumption for that kind of that delivery set? Plus, some users might have paid for pre-lunch delivery and all of those sorts of things. So what we talk about is, in this scenario, those are your constraints. So you've got a certain number of addresses to deliver to in a certain amount of time. You want to keep fuel consumption below a certain point. You've got users that want deliveries that they've paid for before midday. And you've got to basically go, right, let's try loads and loads of different scenarios and work out which of those provides the kind of the maximum quality solution. And this is a huge kind of problem space in machine learning, because, as I'm sure you can understand, there's loads of different scenarios and where this sort of thing becomes quite relevant. So you have to kind of take something that's been applied in a very different space and see how we can reapply it in actually what is a kind of simpler problem, but it's actually quite similar when you start stripping away and looking at the crux of the issue. So if we then jump to our scenario, we see, so we've got 3 keywords here. We've got plums, apples, orange. Yes, they're just kind of arbitrary terms for us to look at. You can see the performance is quite different across this space. And also the availability of installs is quite different across this space. So where we might go that the keyword apple is the cheapest, the actual availability of impressions might be much lower. So if we wanted to spend $100,000 in a month on Apple search ads, we can't just go, right, I'm just going to bid on the keyword apple because that one is the cheapest and delivers me the greatest return on advertising spend, because that we wouldn't be able to spend all of our budget. So you've then got to kind of look at, right, so we've now got multiple keywords. What do we set the bid prices at those? But then we might have another keyword that, although it can spend much more of the budget, it spends it at a point that doesn't deliver a good return on advertising spend for us. So therefore, we might want to dampen down the bids so that we can stay within our aims, but then the availability of installs or impressions decreases as a consequence. So what we're really talking about doing here is we create that picture, that historical performance picture, for as many keywords as we possibly can. And then we let the algorithm work out for us what is the best way to set the bid prices to achieve the objectives that we've set out. And this is a really powerful method, because actually we are able to focus on learning or discovering performance of keywords, and then we're able to algorithmically let the computational code take over and start to optimize the bid prices so that we can maximize our return on investment. Where this gets slightly more complicated in reality is machine learning is only as good as the data that you show it. And what that means is, if all we've ever told it is bid prices and impressions, so we've got an X and a Y axis on our graph as an example, or bid price and installs, it's not able to kind of factor in things like, okay, if I'm a sports app, presumably impression availability will increase on days that there's sports events running. So then you've got to start thinking, well, how do we kind of allow the algorithm to understand about extraneous events that might be happening? And when you start to think about this, there's loads and loads of different facets that you could account for. And what you've got to work out is which of those are actually helpful and which of those are beneficial. And that's kind of where you start to get into the kind of the specifics around how we might do things at our Redbox versus how other organizations might approach the same problem. So what it looks like in reality when you've done that is you've then got budget allocated, you've got bid prices set. So the keyword at Apple, we're going to allow it to have 75% of the budget, and it's allowed to spend up to £2 per tap, and you do that across all of your keywords. This obviously could be done across thousands of keywords in reality, but the problem and the approach is pretty much the same. And it kind of does actually work quite well, and it delivers quite good performance. How does this work at Redbox? What we do here basically is we get our users to provide something called starter keywords. So we'd go, can you please provide us 15 or so keywords which you believe are descriptive of your app? We then go through and use approaches like natural language processing to generate what we would refer to as candidate keywords. Those keywords then go through an assessment process. So we're doing something like what I showed, where you start to learn about the performance of that that keyword for that app, for that campaign. And then as we get to the point where we've learned the performance, so we've got enough data points that we're content that we can do some kind of predictive approaches on it, we're then able to start letting the machine learning side of it take over and start to optimize those keywords. And that's what you can see on the bottom with those kind of gradient bars, is how close we to being able to optimize for that campaign. So this is a really powerful approach. It is one that we use a kind of a version of here at Redbox Mobile. But what I'd really encourage you after listening to this is to really think about, okay, data is really powerful in this space, but try and look at it in a different way. And where we know Apple has stuff that they don't tell us about how things work, there are ways that we can infer how it works by doing a bit of a kind of trial and error approach. And the more data we get, the more kind of predictive and the more accurate we can be in our approach. So I know we've covered quite a lot. It's been a bit of a kind of whip through quite a lot of content, but hopefully you found that really useful, and more than happy to take any questions anyone might have.
Thanks, Sam. That was great. Very interesting session. We already do have a few questions. If anyone has any questions, now is the time to put them into the questions tab. I think we've got 10 minutes, 5-10 minutes now with Samuel. You can ask him any of your Apple search ads technical questions. It's not every day we get the CTO here, so let's take advantage. So we have a question from Emma Bagnall, and Emma's from Driving Test Success app. And yeah, it's a long time App Promotion Summit attendee. So good to see you here today, Emma. I did actually see you at the event. I was hoping to talk to you, and then I think you got distracted. But anyway, thanks for coming to the online as well. She's asking, what would you consider a good TTR for a particular keyword on ASA? Is there a benchmark that if you fall below, it could end up being detrimental to the keyword / ad campaign?
So I don't believe, from what we've seen, there is a detrimental threshold. Speaking to Apple, the indications we've always been given is tap through rate is on a particular keyword and shouldn't have an aggregate effect on the rest of your campaign. Benchmarking what is a good tap through rate is really difficult, because actually it's very dependent on app category. So if we take a utility app, something like, I don't know, a TV remote app or something like that, you generally get a much higher tap through rate, which might be 10, could even be 15%. But then you look at apps in the gaming space and you get much lower tap through rates. It could be in the couple of % range, and that's purely down to the competitiveness of the market. And I guess the decisiveness of the user. Generally, if you're looking for a TV remote app, you're kind of looking for a specific thing to perform a specific function. Whereas a game, you might be having a much kind of, I'm looking for a puzzle game, and therefore you get much lower tap through rates as a result, because people are a bit more indecisive perhaps about what it is they're looking to achieve. What we kind of, going back to the second part of your question, we haven't had any issues with bidding on a large number of keywords and therefore seeing a kind of consequential reduction in the overall campaign performance because some keywords have a low tap through rate. What we would generally advise is, if there are keywords that are performing particularly badly, is to remove them from your campaign yourself, just because you've always got more knowledge that you can bring about the kind of the broader picture than any algorithm is ever going to be able to do. So you've got to work together. You can't just leave it completely to its own devices and expect it to work perfectly. You've got to feed in that domain expertise as you go.
Okay, so hope that answered your question, Emma. So another question is from Histina Kombrova. She's head of marketing at Researcher App, and she says, is there a minimum spend that you recommend for a campaign so you can learn, and also what's going to give the best results?
Yeah, so again, it is going to be very much dependent on your app category, because there you have to spend very different amounts. What we've generally found is that you need to be getting multiple data points for each keyword, and obviously you want to be having multiple keywords. If your target cost per download is going to be $20, putting $100 into that campaign is not going to be very useful, because you're going to be getting a few data points and that's going to be split across multiple keywords. What we would generally advocate is giving a solid budget over the course of a month to really give it time to learn and time to establish. So if you were looking at a $20 cost per download, you're probably going to be looking at $5,000, $10,000 to really be able to give it a proper chance of performing and a proper chance of learning. But equally, if your cost per download goal might be 50 cents, then you might be able to get away with a budget of a few $100s, because it's all about that relationship between the two. But what we would generally encourage is people to speak to us or to research around what a competitive kind of cost per download goal for your particular vertical would be, and then you can work out what an appropriate test budget would be in relation to that.
Great. And Justina has a quick follow-up, which is, would you split keywords in different ad groups? How do you organize them?
So we actually split things into like a discovery type ad group and an optimization ad group, depending on where it is in that learning process. There is the only benefit in kind of going more granular with your ad groups is you can have additional controls over targeting dimensions. If that's something that's useful to you, then it is worthwhile splitting it down further, but you've got to think you're adding additional layers of complexity into that learning process. So if you've got keyword 1 targeting users in one country within one ad group, you've got users being targeted by the same keyword in a different country in a different ad group, you've got to make sure that you're factoring all of these different factors into that learning process. So I don't think there is a kind of hard and fast rule about how many ad groups, what ad groups to use, naming conventions, anything like that. What I would generally encourage is that you to keep things distinct by purpose. And that's kind of the way we tend to break things down where we at Redbox as well.
Great. And Zainab is working at a consumer electronics company and is asking, what about, is there any way to see what our competitors are using as keywords?
So there are ways of doing it. There's a lot of tools that kind of claim to provide insights into that space. I mean, broadly, the only way you can determine exactly who's bidding on what is to kind of repeatedly search for it in the App Store, in effect, to see what adverts are getting served. There's obviously kind of ways that you could look to automate that. But you will find a lot of the products out there do actually offer proposed insights into that space, so that they may be able to provide some indication. If you look at or kind of you refer back to the stuff we did on semantic analysis, you can be relatively confident that if people are using core terms to describe their app, they're probably going to be looking to bid on those sorts of terms, because that's what they've tried to kind of seed and try and maximize their technical relevancy for. So you'll tend to see that news apps will keep using terms of journalism, politics, breaking news, and that's probably because those are the keywords they're going to be wanting to list for. So therefore, those are the keywords they tend to use to describe their app.
Great. And another one, if you don't mind, Sam, from Sarah, who's from a travel company. Our keyword set does not change much. Is it recommended to let campaigns end and start over again? Or is it okay to just increase budget as soon as it comes close to being full?
Yeah, so I'd actually encourage you not to stop campaigns where you can avoid it. You will, although you shouldn't, we have seen slight dips in performance between shutting one campaign down and starting a new one up. Don't really know why that happens, but we do see it. So when you kind of see the budget exhausting, we would generally encourage you to keep extending that budget so that it can spend kind of indefinitely. You're not alone in the sense that you maybe know what your keywords are and performance being relatively consistent against those. What we've done with others is run a 6-monthly or 12-monthly review of that keyword set to see if there may be new keywords based on changing market trends that might be worth bidding for. What you might do is do that discovery function in a separate campaign where you can constrain the budget independently, let that run for a kind of a fixed set of time. And then if there's new keywords that you found in there which deliver the aims that you've got, you can then add them to your master campaign, if that makes sense.
Great. Okay. Well, I think we've only got a minute left, so maybe we'll leave it there. I think we've answered most of the questions, so thanks for those. And thanks, Samuel, for joining us today. So, well, one we didn't was, well, Celia was asking, well, how can you learn more about this? So, you know, have you got a blog, or where can people find out more?
So, I mean, firstly, I encourage you to reach out to me. Always happy to provide more insights into this. We're going to be doing more talks on this over the coming months, it kind of coincide with the release of our new platform. But yeah, if there's appetite to go more into the data side of things, I'm very happy to do that. Please just reach out to me, and we'll chat.
Great. All right. Well, thanks so much, Samuel. And just your email, it was sam@Redbox Mobile, was it? Let me just
yeah, that's it.
We got it there. Okay, so there you go. Anyone watching the live recording, maybe now or in several years' time on YouTube, here's Sam's email, and yeah, you can get in touch with him there. Well, okay, thanks a lot, Sam. That was great, and yeah, see you soon.
Cool. Thank you, everyone.